This is Contemporary Chinese Revised Edition, Volume 2, Lesson 6, and we're going through words and expressions. So let's start off with hometown. So we actually had a word in Lesson 5, which was also for hometown. This is another word with the same meaning, and it is 老家. 老家. The word in lesson 5 was 家乡. So you'll notice that in both words there is the character 家 for home or family. So both words are used interchangeably. Next word, countryside. 农村. 农村. So I guess another way we would refer to the countryside in Australia would be to say rural areas. If you look at the characters, nong means agriculture. Cun means a village. So that's where we get countryside from. And in China, there is a very clear divide between urban and rural or countryside. And there's quite a lot of, how can we say, almost prejudices built around that division. Where people in urban areas often tend to look down on those that come from the countryside, and sometimes coming from the countryside is almost can be used as an insult. Anyhow, moving on, we go to north and south. North is 北方, south is 南方. Here they're using the terms north and south in a very specific way. They're using it specifically to refer to the northern part of China and the southern part of China. And again, there is a big historical, cultural, and I guess you could almost argue ethnic and linguistic divide between the north and the south. So generally speaking, the division line is at the Yangtze River, or in modern terminology, the Changjiang River. And when we think of the south, we'll often think of places like Guangdong province and Fujian province and so on. The dialects are quite different in each of those areas. I guess to some extent it's not dissimilar to the way maybe the Americans refer to, you know, the sort of the northerners and the southerners in America. Anyhow, a lot of Chinese history, a lot of dynasties and wars and movement of population have been between the north and the south. So that's specifically referring to the two parts of the country. And you can use that terminology for any country, but just so that you understand, in China it has a specific significance. And next word is 东北, northeast. 东北. The term northeast in itself is just part of the various terms for different parts of the compass, different, I guess, directions, if you like. But in China, again, 东北 has a very specific significance. It refers to an area of China in the northeast that is famous for a whole lot of reasons. But particularly, I mean, some of the things that people often talk about in Dongbei is the fact that some of the purest Mandarin is spoken in that area. There are a range of different ethnic minorities in Dongbei in China, amongst which are the Korean ethnic minority, which is particularly relevant at this point in time when this is being recorded, given the tensions between North Korea and the rest of the world. And also, I guess, you know, Dongbei featured fairly significantly in pre-World War II and during World War II in terms of Japanese occupation of the area. Anyhow, so that's referring to a very specific area in China. It can be used in the context of other countries, but just understand that in terms of China, Dongbei is an area, a region, made up of a number of provinces that has a special significance. Moving on, we go to east side. So 东边 or 东面. Let's just go through the list and then we'll talk about the differences between bian and mian. So we've got south side, 南边 or 南面. We've got west side, 西边 or 西面. And we've got north side, 北边 or 北面. So we have, after each of those points of the compass, we have either the word bian, and when it's said on its own, its first tone, bian, or mian. So bian literally means the edge of something, I guess, if you like. Mian is the face of something. So on a cube, the face on a cube. So generally speaking, you would use these terms in relation to some kind of reference point. So for example, we could talk about the Monash Clayton campus. So campus is 校园. I might just pop that in there for you, if I can do that. Let's see how we go. 校园. Oops, I just need to be patient and let that catch up with me. There we go. Oops, 校园, which equals campus. And so that could be our reference point. And then we could say 校园的东边, 校园的南边, 校园的西边, 校园的北边. And we could use mian as well. So that's referring obviously to each of the sides of the campus. And then you might use the campus as a reference point to talk about another place, another location relative to the campus. So you might say, 在校园的东边有很多饭店, for example. Okay, so it's used in that sense. You could also use it in reference to a country. For example, you might say 在中国的 sorry, let me take that back. We might say Korea, 朝鲜, North Korea. Let's do that. So I'll just show you the word for that. 朝鲜, which is 朝鲜, which equals the North Korea. 朝鲜在中国的东边. So North Korea is on the east side of China. So China is the reference point, and then we talk about where North Korea is in relation to that. Just while we're on the topic of the cardinal points of the compass, in English, when we go through all the different points on the compass, we talk about north, south, east, and west. In Chinese, it's different. They refer to it this way: 东南西北. And you'll notice that the word list here reflects that. 东边, 南边, 西边, 北边. Also, if we go back to vocab word number 5, northeast, you'll notice that we say north first, then east. So the reference point to some extent is north. For the Chinese, it is 东北, 东北. Now, if it was northwest, it would be 西北, 西北. So their word order for reference points on the compass is different from ours. One explanation that I've heard as to why they start from dong rather than the north is to do with where the sun rises. So obviously the sun rises in the east each day and sets in the west. So whether or not that's the whole reason, that's certainly a logical reason as to why they might start from the east and work around the compass that way. Okay, so let's move on to another very handy word. So we're talking about positions of things, places, people in relation to other things, places, and people. And we have opposite side. And the term in Chinese is 对面, 对面. So generally speaking, if you're going to talk about something being on the opposite side of something else, you would say 在对面，在 在 Okay, 在对面. So here in the middle, you might put again a reference point. So it might be opposite the classroom. Something is opposite the classroom. So you would say 在教室对面，在教室对面. Anyhow, you'll see some more examples of how that works in the dialogues. Moving on, we now have river. So this is one word for river, very common word. 河, and the measure word for river is 一条, 河 is 条. There is another word for river which is 江. Just put that pinyin there. 江. And there is a combined word for river which is 江河. So when they're referring to rivers in general, you know, the rivers of China, China's rivers, 中国的江河, often they'll use the combined word. But for this lesson, we're just learning the word 河. In terms of the measure word 条, again, I think we've mentioned it earlier lessons, things that are kind of long and thin. So I guess to some degree a river fits that. Moving on, we come to air. 空气. 空气. 空 means sky, qi means gas. So I guess you can see possibly where that meaning comes from, 空气. I think we've previously learned the word fresh. In fact, I'm sure, yeah, in an earlier lesson we learned the fresh, which was 新鲜. Okay, 新鲜. So that could be a word that we could use to describe air. 这里的空气很新鲜. Or you can just use other words like 好. Moving on, we have environment or surroundings. 环境. 环境. So just need to explain the difference between environment and surroundings. So in terms of environment, 环境 can mean the same as we often mean the word environment in English when we talk about, you know, environmental problems. So the sort of that bigger concept of environment. And also in Chinese, it can refer to surroundings. So in other words, the immediate surroundings of a particular place. So you might be talking about, you know, the surroundings around your house. So that would include the garden, maybe the neighbors in the street and so on. So it's down at that sort of more immediate level. So, excuse me, 环境 can be used for either of those. Moving on, we have transportation and traffic. And in Chinese, that is 交通. 交通. Again, these two words are slightly different. So the same Chinese word has two slightly different meanings. So transportation in the general sense of transportation. So when we talk about, you know, our transport in Melbourne is not great. 墨尔本的交通不是特别好. We're referring to things like, you know, public transport and public roads and that sort of thing. So it can be in that larger sense. But we can also refer specifically to traffic. In other words, you know, the number of cars on the road at any particular time. And here's one word that we could potentially use with traffic to describe it. There'll be some other words in the dialogue, but we learned the expression 厉害, which we learned meant to be could be very, you know, strict or severe in the sense of the way, you know, a person behaves and so on, but also can refer to how an issue or a problem is very severe. So you could say, and I'm making this up, 墨尔本的交通很厉害。墨尔本的交通很厉害。So we're saying that the traffic in Melbourne is really severe, as in, traffic jams and the number of cars and so on the road. Anyhow, I think in our dialogue here, they use the word 交通 together with the next word, which means convenient. So the word for convenient is 方便. 方便. So 方便 is actually a very useful word. So when we use it in terms of, 这里的交通很方便, we're referring more, I guess, to transportation. So the transportation here is very convenient, which in China's major cities now is very true, with their light rail, underground, taxis, buses, and so on. It is very convenient. 方便 can be used together with all kinds of different situations. So if somebody asks you to do something, and you might say, 对不起，我现在做不方便. So it's not convenient for me to do it now. The other way it's used, and it's definitely not used this way in the textbook, but this is definitely part of real life use. If you want to say in a polite way that I want to go to the toilet, you can say 我想去方便一下. 我想去方便一下. You can also, it's kind of handy when, say, for example, you're looking after a group of people, and you want to, say, for example, offer them the opportunity to go to the loo when maybe you're out, I don't know, visiting some area or other. 参观, we did that word 参观, to visit. And instead of saying 你们要不要上厕所, do you want to go to the toilet? You can say 你们想方便一下吗? So you can use the word 方便 for to go to the toilet. Okay, here's another word that is often used in China by Chinese to describe areas that are bustling with noise and excitement. There's lots of people and lots of things going on. And they talk about the place being 热闹. 热闹. So that's when you describe a place that is very busy with traffic and people and all sorts of activities. 热闹 actually in China is also used in another sense. So, for example, when two people or a group of people have a disagreement, and it might get quite, and particularly in a public place, and it might get quite loud. There is a saying in China that many people like to 看热闹. I just typed that out for you. 看热闹. So 看 is a word that we've learned before, which means to read, to look at, to watch. And 热闹 is this new word that we're learning, meaning bustling with noise and excitement. But it can also mean when there's some kind of action going on, like a group of people arguing, or if there was a traffic accident, or something along those lines. Or even sometimes if it's on the positive side, it might be, to just give a silly example, but if there's some kind of, say, for example, famous movie star that's just come into town or seen walking around somewhere and lots of people rush over to have a look. I remember when I first went to China back in the mid-80s, as a foreigner, which was very rare in most Chinese cities in those days, if you were walking around having a look at different places and you had a map in your hand, and, for example, you might stop on the side of the street for a moment to have a look at your map to see where you are, orient yourself. Quite often, within minutes, you would have a big crowd of people gathered around you, all staring at you, trying to work out what it is you're looking at and what are you doing there, and because in those days not many people had actually seen foreigners with their own eyes. And in one case, I remember one gentleman, I was sitting on a bench with a friend and we were looking at a map, and you could see him sort of quietly walking across to where we were sitting, and then he looked down and he saw me looking at a map, and then he just very gently took the map out of my hands, picked it up, and started walking off reading my map. So those are examples of 看热闹, 看热闹. So people that, out of curiosity or whatever it is, will go over and look at whatever's going on, whether it be an argument or an accident or someone famous or whatever it is. In some ways, the Chinese themselves see this as a bad thing, because often if there's an argument, for example, going on, and people go and 看热闹, they don't just stand there watching. Often they'll kind of start offering their opinions and taking sides, and things can get out of hand a little bit. Anyhow, that's a different meaning for 热闹, but just so that you're aware of it. Next one we have is 吵, 吵. So here it means noisy. So you can talk about a place being, 很吵. And also it can mean to, let me put the pinyin for that. 吵架, to have an argument. Yeah, so often when one has an argument, one can be quite noisy, so that's possibly the connection there. Now we go on to another. So those two, 热闹 and 吵 are both adjectives describing the characteristics of some place or some situation. Now we have a 4-character expression, which is called in Chinese a 成语. 成语. Chengyus are, I guess we sometimes call them proverbs in English. Really what they are is sort of fixed expressions, generally made up of 4 characters. So if we have a look over here at the characters, we've got 4 characters. Quite often they come from classical works in Chinese. I guess the most outstanding feature of 成语, this kind of fixed expression, is that the 4 characters often can have quite a lot and quite a deep meaning behind it. There may even be a whole story that sits behind the 成语. Chinese learn 成语from a very, very young age. And also in China, and it's interesting, I noticed the difference between people living in China and those, for example, that have lived overseas for many years. In China itself, 成语 are used commonly in everyday life, in everyday speech. So they're not just used in writing, they are actually also used when speaking. What I noticed amongst a lot of my colleagues here in Australia that are from China, and also friends, is that they don't use the 成语 anywhere near as much, when they're speaking Mandarin here. Why? I guess, one reason is that Chinese is not the mainstream language here. I often wonder though, in English, we tend to shy away from using fixed expressions. Things like, too many cooks spoil the broth, stitch in time saves 9. It's, I don't know about now, but certainly in the past, using too many of these kinds of fixed idiomatic expressions was seen as a sign of somebody lacking linguistic ability and lacking imagination. So we tend to not use them. But very definitely in China, if you use 成语 in your speaking and in your writing, and you use them appropriately, it's a sign of education. So it's looked up to. It's a good thing. So it's very different from here. So this particular expression, heavy traffic, 车水马龙, 车水马龙. The shui becomes a second tone because it's followed by ma, the third tone. And if you look at the characters, we know all those characters. So we've got vehicle, water, horse, and dragon. How has that got anything to do with heavy traffic? Well, I guess if you think back, a lot of these terms developed in the past, and historically for most of China's history, so-called traffic would have been horse and cart. And horses and carts would have been hauling things like, water and all sorts of other goods and so on. Where the long comes into it, well, actually, long is often used in the expression for a long line. So a long line of people or a long line of anything like that. So vehicles, for example, is often described as a long, a dragon. So the next expression is surely or definitely. And in Chinese that is 一定. 一定. So just notice here with the 一, because it's followed by 定, which is fourth tone, the 一 becomes 一, second tone. So it's an adverb, as it says there, and so therefore you can put it before a verb or an adjective. So, for example, we might be about ready to start class, and I'm waiting for a particular student, and I ask you, 他来不来? And you might say, 老师,他一定来. So you're saying he will definitely come. And then another example might be, so that was where we used a verb, 来, and we put 一定 before it. If you want to use it with an adjective, for example, I've heard it so many times when you talk about, you're in China, you're talking to somebody in China about your family and your children, and, I talk about my daughters, and they say, 哎呀,你的女儿一定漂亮,一定漂亮. So, I mean, they're just being polite. Often I haven't even shown them a photograph at this point, but that's just a politeness. So your daughter or daughters would definitely be beautiful. So there's two examples of using 一定, one with a verb and one with an adjective. If we now move on to the next one, we have the expression 多么. 多么. Now here it says, you can either use just the 多 on its own or the whole thing 多么. We've come across the word 多 before, which means many, but here it has a slightly different meaning, and I think the definition they give here is inadequate. So it's an adverb, as we can see over here in the brackets. So that means it can go before a verb or an adjective, but more often than not, I would say it would come before an adjective. So I could say something like, there's a particular situation or a particular person, whatever, and I might say, I might use the expression 多么好呀. I think this actually comes up in the dialogues as well. So 好 is our adjective, and I put 多么 before, and I could just say 多好. 多好. Means the same thing, and what we're basically saying is, oh wow, how good is it? This situation you talked about or whatever it is, oh how fantastic, how great, how good it is. That's we in English we might just say something like, oh that's really brilliant, but this is how it's used. We could talk about, if somebody does something particularly fast, you might say, 多么快呀. It's particularly beautiful. How beautiful is that? 多么漂亮, etc. So there's lots of examples of how you can use that. Moving on to the next word. On the surface of it, it appears to be a negative word, and in Chinese it is a negative word. To die, 死. So they use it literally in that sense. 他死了, he's dead. So it's a word that's a bit of a sensitive word in some ways at times. Certainly Chinese New Year, you should never use the word 死 with relatives, particularly older relatives. You just don't mention that sort of thing at Chinese New Year. The other thing that you're probably already aware of is the fact that the Chinese are superstitious about the number 4. They don't like the number 4. And if you think about it, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it has the same spelling, it has the same sound, different tone, but in a way the same sound. So the Chinese mind associates the number 4, 死, with the verb to die, 死, and so it's not a lucky number. And in most of their buildings in China, they don't have the fourth floor, for example. However, as we'll see in the dialogues for this lesson, it can actually be used as a way of expressing degree in terms of adjectives. So when we're describing the characteristic of something and we want to talk about the degree to which that thing possesses that characteristic, we can use 死 to achieve that. So for example, we just learned the word 吵, which we said meant noisy. So if it's extremely noisy, you can describe the situation as 吵死了, 吵死了, 吵死了. That's very commonly used, meaning that it's extremely noisy. So in this case, 吵 in itself is a slightly negative thing, I guess, and then 死 just adds to that sense of negativeness. You could also say a similar thing about 吵 using a word or an expression that we learned last week. 吵急了. So remember last week we learned the expression 急了, 急了. You can add that after an adjective to express the extreme degree of something. So you could say 吵急了. It's extremely noisy. So that's more neutral. It's not as negative as saying 吵死了. So with a word like 吵, I'm sure you're not surprised that you can use 死. But there are other expressions where you can use 死 to express extreme degree, which might surprise you because they're not inherently negative words or words with negative connotations. So we learned the expression 可爱, 可爱, meaning cute. Now I'm sure it wouldn't surprise you if we said, 可爱, 可爱极了, 可爱极了, meaning extremely cute. But you can also say 可爱死了. I'll just wait for that to catch up to me. 可爱死了, 可爱死了. When often they'll talk about, I don't know, a small child being extremely cute, or a panda bear or whatever it is, and they will use that 死 to express extreme degree. 可爱死了. So it's kind of like cute to death, not literally, but anyhow. So it can also be used in together with adjectives that you wouldn't normally consider to be negative.